I'd like to also thank Diane and Wendy Millett, who's over here doing the video. Wendy is a former intern at Water, and once you're an intern at Water, you're always part of Water. And she's now a doctoral student doing exams at Yale, and one of our great colleagues and friends. And it's so exciting to see the folks who come to Water for a year, as she did through the Loretto Volunteer Program, or the Mennonite Program, or other programs that send people to us. It's great to see them go on and do wonderful things as you are, Wendy, and all our congratulations and all our power to you for the exams and then the dissertation. So, if you would prefer not to be filmed, may I suggest that you move to that sort of end of things, if there's anybody who would prefer not to be filmed for whatever reasons of your own previous contracts with Hollywood or personal politics or whatever that might make it difficult for you. But otherwise, Wendy will be filmed. We appreciate that. We gather just after the midterm elections. Some of us remember last year and 2 years ago, and we gather right after the midterms here in the U.S., where things are looking the slightest tad up after the last dismal 2 years. But we gather while wars and crises in Yemen, Sudan, Gaza, not to mention countless mass shootings, ecological crises, especially in California, Cynthia, with the fires, and racist actions and nationalist rhetoric, all of which pepper our consciousness, not only in the U.S. but in other parts of the world, having devastating effects. And so our work is, in one way or another, an attempt to counter all of those things, which is why we come together, not naively, but at least for support and for ideas and for inspiration. And I think the fact that we've done this for 2 decades says something about the ongoing need to do this. The idea formed in 1995, and since the annual meeting in 1997 in San Francisco, where we had the first such circle of this sort, we have been meeting, I think I could say faithfully and fruitfully, Elizabeth, since then. So I appreciate each and every one of you being here, and I give a particular welcome to people who have not been here before. We're really delighted that you're with us, and we hope that you feel that this is one of your friendly, if not home spaces, at the AAR-SBL, because especially if you're new to the annual meeting, you'll discover quickly that by about tomorrow afternoon or Sunday, you will be wishing you were back in a circle like this, rather than looking at the backs of the heads of people who are talking at you. So you'll see what I mean. Diane has kindly passed around the sheet. We would like to have you sign up, and we'd also we'll put you on our Google list, which gets the notices. And if you want to post to that list, if you have something like Cynthia, your publication, Susan, others of yours, Elizabeth, things from FSR and so forth, post them to that list and let people know what's going on. Use it as a resource, because it really does, I think, help very much to get the word out. On your chairs, there's a newsletter from Water, which is the group that sponsors this. And as you know, these kinds of programs don't happen by themselves. And if you would like to be a donor to Water and receive the newsletter on a regular basis that's on your chair, we would very much appreciate your support. In any case, feel free to use all of our resources at www.waterwomensalliance.org. And there you'll find not only research. Come on in, Toddy and friends. Pull up some chairs. We really welcome you to use our resources. That's what they're there for. And there are monthly teleconferences, monthly meditation sessions, and monthly liturgies, all of which are both on the telephone as well as in person at the office. So if you're in Hawaii and you want to be part of one of our teleconferences, all you have to do is dial in at the right time, and you're on with whoever it will be. Last month it was Teresia Hinga from the University of Santa Clara. And actually, we also had Angela Yarber from Hawaii this past couple weeks ago, and we look forward to many other people who will be part of our.
We had Toddy.
We had Toddy Peters, her very self, who was not only who was also in the office, which is a rare public appearance outside of North Carolina. Her agent let her go to Washington, and we had a nice, wonderful experience with Toddy's new book, Trust Women, which I highly recommend from Beacon Press, and it really, I think, is making a splash in a very important way, taking the work of Beverly Harrison from long ago on reproductive rights to a reproductive justice frame. And it really is a very, very helpful resource. But the great thing about the water talks, not only is the people who give them, but also other people here present have given water talks in their day, and there will be more. But you can listen to them, and all you have to do is click on the image of the person or on the water talk title, and you can listen and use them for teaching and so forth, and I recommend that you do that. Let's get to our business this afternoon. 2 years ago, we looked at agitating boundaries, intersectionality, and political action. Some of us will remember that. Our circle that day was Reverend Dr. Katie Cannon, who has left us from this world of late. I want to just take a moment in her memory. May her spirit surround us. Last year we looked at resistance, resilience, and creativity. We needed that badly. And this year we look at the outsized role of economics, and that was really the topic that people who were around the circle last year brought up, both in terms of the microeconomic questions of what it means to be an adjunct or somebody looking for a job or someone trying to figure out how to make a living in this very difficult context, but also the macro questions. So we put them together, and we're calling it Economics, Global and Local Intertwined, a Feminist Liberation Theology Priority. And I think that the term priority maybe is the most operative of words in the title, because it says to us something about the urgency of the situation, the economic situation for all of us around the world, but from particular and very different and very varied social locations. And so that's some of what we want to get to today. Once again, this year, we're very happy to be in collaboration with the Women's Caucus, and we will continue this discussion tomorrow morning at their session at 9 o'clock. And I urge you to join us for that session if you have the opportunity. There are 3 papers that will be given tomorrow morning, each one of which is very apropos of our theme. The session is from 9 to 11:30. It will be in the Convention Center on this same level in room 112. And I really hope that people will join for that. It's called Response-Ability, Rethinking Economics in the Feminist Theological Discourse. And being the respondent to the papers, I've had the opportunity to read them and found them very challenging and very useful. So I'll give a report from our meeting and then respond to the papers. And Susan, I hope will join me. I don't know if you're going to have an opportunity, but to make remarks as well. So this is a way to have really 2 sessions on a theme with people who are both practitioners and scholars of these materials, and I think that it will be an opportunity for us to deepen the analysis. So I want to extend a special welcome to the chairs of the caucus and to their friends, and to express our gratitude once again to you for the continued collaboration that I think has been so happy in the last several years. Let me simply conclude with a format of what we are going to do here today. We're going to start, as we always do, with very brief introductions. You actually will hear from each person around the circle as to who they are and what they do in a very brief way. And then you'll actually talk to people. I know this is a concept at the AR, but you'll actually talk to people. And then we will have Elizabeth introducing our speakers, who will have roughly 8 to 10 minutes each to say something with regard to the topic. They will not inundate you, but they will tantalize you with, I think, some ideas that will get conversation going. We will then move into small groups where we will talk about some focused questions, and then we'll conclude with a plenary session of discussion on economic and theological issues, trying to get as concrete as we can in terms of what kinds of things we can do next to move this along. I repeat that the video will be on all the time for the speakers and for our conversations, not for the small groups. But if you don't want to be in the video, just let Wendy know. So I will start with the introduction to model how quickly and efficiently this is done. And then Elizabeth will conclude with her own introduction, and then she'll introduce our speakers, and they will introduce themselves briefly, of course, around the circle. So does anybody have a question about format? We will conclude by 6 o'clock. And I know that's an ambitious agenda, but we have accomplished that every other, 21 other years. So worry not, we will accomplish our agenda, and everybody will have an opportunity to be involved. So are there questions or any lack of clarity? No. Again, the most important thing is you're welcome and we're delighted you're here. My name is Mary Hunt. I live in Silver Spring, Maryland in the U.S. I'm the co-director of Water, the newsletter you have on your chair. And I worry, the question I want us to talk about is, what is one economic issue with which we're struggling? What's part of your current concern in terms of economics? And I want to say that I worry about building a budget for water. That's one concern. But my major concern is the gross inequality that finds many of my peers worrying about the ups and downs of the stock market, while many teach, including many teachers and students of universities and colleges, face food scarcity, staggering student debt, living in their cars while they go to school. And so something I think is hugely wrong when some people I know are worried about the stock market and other people I know are living in their cars and trying to go to school and will still end up with enormous debt. So I just want to lift up those very different poles of the reality in which I find myself. Susan?
Susan Thistlethwaite, speaking later, so I won't go on at great length. Professor of Theology, Chicago Theological Seminary. What I worry about in terms of economics, I am presenting on Sunday late afternoon. I wrote an article for Religious Studies News called "Our Schools Are Running Ethical Deficits." And this is a case that you have highfalutin mission statements and you got crap conduct in relationship to your adjunct and contingent faculty, and indeed even to your full-time faculty. And I want the ATS to make that a subject for accreditation. No, I'm so pissed. So. Yes.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Carfor. I actually just recently got my PhD in October, so I'm a little shocked, actually.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it'll sink in eventually. So in my dissertation, I talk a lot about ecofeminist philosophy, and I talked briefly about, and this is tying into what I care about economically, and it's mostly this idea of blind spots and how economic policy is based upon this extractive model which takes from the earth and doesn't give back. And so I have a deep fear about the sort of like Freudian return of the repressed. Like, what is that sort of like idea of what's going to happen in the future when we just keep taking and we don't give anything back?
And Susan identified herself as both, you're on the faculty in Chicago, but you also live here.
Yeah, I do.
I get locations so we know where we are.
San Francisco.
San Francisco. Okay, great.
My name is Teresa Uglar. I'm in Los Angeles. I'm at California State University, and I do ecofeminism in Latin America. And in terms of economics, I agree with Mary about, I have students that live in cars. I have individuals who say that, because in LA, the housing is really expensive, so they have enough money to be able to pay their bills per se, but not for housing. And then also the inequity in terms of lecturers and tenure track. Someone said that lecturers are often the migrant workers within the academy, and I was like, oh, that's very interesting and telling. So I appreciate you bringing it up within the context of administration for reform.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Alicia Pangaliban, co-chair of the Women's Caucus, and I'm a graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary, but I'm currently based now in Chicago, and concern for economics, so many, but just one. But what struck me when you mentioned about kids living in cars, I was shocked to see it in the universities in Chicago.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Oh, sure. I'm Wendy Millette. I'm a PhD student at Yale and live in Connecticut. And I would say that, I was an intern at Water in 2012, 2013. And the student debt, seeing the way that constrains so many of my friends and colleagues' day-to-day lives is alarming.
Hi, Anu, co-founder and co-director of Water with Mary. I'm going to go to the other end of the spectrum, and I'm always concerned right now for the elderly, especially the elderly women. So I'll bring them to our circle.
My name's Kylie Crabb. I'm in Melbourne. I'm a research fellow at Australian Catholic Uni. and I work in biblical studies. I'm just starting a new project that has some stuff to do with disability in the early church. So I guess if I were to pinpoint a particular economic issue at the minute, there are interesting things in ancient texts about different abilities and value and economics, and I think that these have a lot of contemporary relevance as well, thinking about how we think about value and economic priorities and people of different abilities. So that's me.
I'm Sally Douglas, and I'm a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Divinity in Melbourne. And I'm also, my research is across New Testament studies, early church and systematic theology, so holding those together with a particular focus on Christology and soteriology, and increasingly the way in which soteriology constructs understandings of discipleship. And as well as that, I'm also a minister within the Uniting Church. And as part of that role, I have an inner city congregation, and we run a food centre together with our Catholic and Anglican colleagues. So I see constantly I'm in the tension of looking at ancient texts and being with people who are in need of food security and are living on the edges of society. So the tensions are very real in seeking to make both relevant to one another.
Thank you. And speak up if you can. We close the room. Please speak up so that we can all hear. Thank you.
I'm Coralie Ling. I'm a long-term friend of WADA, and I'm a retired minister of the Uniting Church in Melbourne. And where I live, one of the major concerns for many of us is the situation of homelessness amongst older women, and how that comes about through not having proper superannuation, etc. So we're very concerned about that. Fortunately, we've got one small project that houses 38 older women, but we need many more.
Good afternoon. My name is Janice Poss, and I'm a PhD student at Claremont Graduate University, and I'm an interfaith theologian, primarily in women's studies, and I'll be speaking on issues of sexual harassment tomorrow in the morning session as it intersects with corporate America.
I'm Rosalind Hinton, and I live kind of between San Francisco and New Orleans, two great cities. And I am an independent scholar. I have a website, Louisiana Out Loud, and almost a new one now about Jewish women in New Orleans. And I am concerned personally just with making a living, because it's not very easy. And then I'm very concerned about the women who are in Cancer Alley, which is 90 miles between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, which has 200 chemical plants. And they're about to put 4 more right on top of free towns that were founded by post-slaves and their families. And they've been in families for generations. And so I've been doing a little work around that too.
I'm Colleen Hartung, and I'm from Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, which is just outside of Madison. I am the chair of the 1,000 Women in Religion Project for the Women's Caucus. Come ask me more about that, come learn about it at our sessions. And I also am a political organizer. That just happened over the last 3 years, and Wisconsin did good at the midterms, so yay. And unlike the last election, so, and then my economic concern, there are many, but I have 3 children who have a genetic disorder, and my daughter just started on a new medication that is $100,000 a year. And so it's a struggle always to make sure they have insurance. They're all adults, but you know, it's a choice of jobs, and they all have pre-existing conditions, which is why I'm knocking doors, you know. So anyway.
Thank you.
I'm Elizabeth Ersick. I'm the co-chair of the Women's Caucus with Alicia, and we're so delighted to be doing this again with FLTN. And I'm a professor of religious studies in Phoenix Arizona, at a community college, a large urban community college. And so we are, as faculty, trying to raise money for our DACA students who were admitted and now have to pay 5 times as much to come back to school. So the idea of economics as a weapon to stop is very interesting to me. And personally, we have 1/3 of our students are at risk. We have a food pantry. So all those issues that you talked about. The other one is here at this space. I just came off the Parliament of World Religions. I served on a board and did the women's programming up in Toronto, but it's expensive to go to it, and it's expensive to come here. So at the Women's Caucus, we're talking about creating some kind of international network and flipping the model to let feminist theologians Skype in and do something in the women's lounge where their presence and their voice can be present, even if they can't physically be present.
We look forward to continued collaboration.
Yeah.
This would be a good place to do that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
We look forward to it. Yeah. Thank you.
My name is Anderson Radi. I come from South Africa, which is arguably the most unequal country in the world. I live in Stellenbosch, which is arguably the most unequal town in South Africa. I'm interested in issues of climate change, and I don't think we will solve that without solving inequality.
Welcome. Gabriella?
I'm Gabriella Berrettini from Switzerland. I'm sort of an activist. One of my great topics is environment. But the situation in Switzerland is that there are no homeless people, but there is a great risk of people with long-term health problems and risk for women, elderly women, because the insurance is not good enough for them. Poverty risk is high, though it's still nothing compared to what happened.
Welcome.
I'm Elisabeth. I'm retired theologian, and I have now time to travel to work today.
Great to have you. And you also have an excellent blog that I read. Very interesting. Excellent blog. Yeah. Located in Lucerne. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kelsey Ryan Simpkins. I'm a PhD student at Ohio State, and I study agriculture and food systems. So my economic concern is the corporate consolidation and concentration that squeezes people at all levels, with small and mid-sized farmers losing their land, farm workers and food service workers paid unlivable wages, and people worldwide unable to access the great abundance of food that we actually produce.
Good afternoon. My name is Anna-Kaisa Inkala. I come from Finland, from Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland. I'm interested in environmental issues and climate issue, and I'm very concerned about forests. Our church is now doing a new strategy for climate issues, and I'm wondering how much economics influences on these matters.
Welcome.
I'm Elaine Nogueira Godsi. I'm assistant professor at the Methodist Theological School in Ohio. I'm Brazilian by birth and South African by heart. And I'm a co-feminist scholar that works in the intersection of feminist liberation theology and post-colonial theories. And my biggest economic concern is that how almost 100% of the time my American students are unaware about how their lifestyle depends on the exploited labor of people of color, which most are poor women of color in both the developing and developed worlds.
Thanks. Welcome. Rita?
I'm Rita Nakashima Brock. I retired a year and a half ago from academe and am now a senior vice president and director of the Shea Moral Injury Center for Volunteers of America in Alexandria, Virginia. We are the largest nonprofit builder of affordable housing. And my work in the last 2 years has been mostly with military veterans with moral injury, both male and female, who live in our transitional house. They're recently homeless and live in our our transitional housing projects or in low-income housing we provide to veterans with children. So most of my work the last 2 years has been with veterans, but I just received a grant to move moral injury work into the child welfare space, which is another area where poverty has an enormous impact.
My name is, My name is Kelly Caldwell. I'm a PhD student at Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. And I think the thing that I'm thinking about most right now, because we came from the smoke that is just sitting on the San Francisco Bay Area, is the way that economic inequality affects people's ability to adapt to and to respond to crises like this that are driven by climate change. So the way that people who have money can go indoors and turn on their air filter and put on their nice big masks when they go out, and the way that people that don't have access to that stuff also bear on their bodies that kind of the continued trauma that's going to have long-lasting effects.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Johnson. I'm also at Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. I'm a student there, and many economic concerns, but one that I would raise just in relation to my own work would be about economic inequality within congregations, but also maybe more profound between congregations and also globally.
Miriam is not in the program right now, but one economic concern would be among people with disabilities seeking employment, not having access, and continuing in education to take on more debt, but may not result in greater access.
Thank you and welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Shay Watts. I'm a PhD student at Chicago Theological Seminary. I'm studying for my exams in the spring, so pray for me. My research focuses on sort of liberation theology and religious experience, particularly like Pentecostalism. So I'm very much interested in the body and the ways that we experience things that shape who we are and the way that we live and are in the world. So economic concerns, I think about economics, I think about exploitative capitalism, I think about gentrification is a big one. I lived in Charleston, South Carolina for a long time. You know, from block to block, it just looks so different. And so looking at the intersections of race, economics, etc.
Thank you. Renata?
My name is Renata Jost, and I come from Germany, and I'm professor for feminist theology and gender studies in Bavaria there. And I think about in terms of economic things. You talked about capitalism. What is there an alternative system? Because I don't see it. Yeah, how can we change the system? It's a big system, and then on a smaller way of thinking. I think about how is it still possible that in a country like Germany, most people or most children who don't come from an academic family have no chance to get a higher education, and split is still going on in this country, and this makes me really I don't believe it in a country like this.
Thank you. Welcome again.
My name is Nicole Schmidt. I'm kind of here just as a guest for this session, so thank you so much for letting me be here. I don't work in theology at all. I'm actually in social work. I did study theology though, so I'll kind of pick up on what you're talking about. So for me, working in social work, I work with youth who are experiencing homelessness, 15 to 24 here in Denver, as an S Street outreach worker. So I'm hyper aware right now of the way that mental health crisis for people usually is only treatable long term if you have insurance or you have resources, and I have a lot of people who will probably become chronically homeless because they don't have access to that care. So it's one thing I'm aware of recently.
Thank you. Glad you came.
I'm Gabe Molabita, and I'm currently in Denver, and an economic concern of mine is the privatization of things that shouldn't be privatized, specifically prisons and the consequences that come from that profit seeking.
to slide the intersections of feminist and queer ethics through a Catholic lens, and their conversation with Appalachian labor organizing. So that's an economic interest.
Wonderful.
Hi, I'm Lauren McGraw.
Please speak louder so
Sorry, sit up straight. And I'm an independent scholar from Australia. Because I don't have an institutional affiliation, I had to work a few different jobs this year to get here. And one of the jobs was at a community centre where they're really focusing on small farming and food literacy. So I've been doing a bit of research on industrialised farming practices, and that's really opened my eyes to some, economic costs there. I think when I arrived in Denver 2 days ago and walked around, it also occurred to me that Western cities look much the same now, wherever you go, and that's largely because of the corporate brands that have taken over the cities, and that includes the food brands. So I think that greed for profit of those large corporations is what is bothering me right now.
thank you and welcome.
My name is Katie Lees. I am also a guest here. I do have my MDiv from the Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley, and I currently work for Women's Ordination Conference, which advocates for the ordination of women as deacons and priests and bishops into the Roman Catholic Church. I'm a local. I live outside Boulder, and I share many of the issues or concerns that you've named, and one that I would raise as the mother of 2 small children is kind of the baby penalty that women who have children face and how that persists throughout their lives and careers.
Let me just clarify. If some are guests, we're all guests. This is an open circle, has been an open circle for more than 20 years, and there's no distinction of people who have been here before. So please, those who might think of themselves as somehow outsiders or beyond the group, there is no such distinction here. So please, let's make that clear and keep it so that you feel invited and welcome and that we're in this together, because God knows the issues already. Go ahead, ladies.
Hi, I'm Julie Mavity Malamina. I graduated in May from Southern Methodist University with a PhD in ethics. My dissertation looked at intersections of class, race, gender, and sexuality in the U.S. political economy through the lenses of racial and ethnically diverse single working class mothers. So I'm looking at single mothers and centering their voices as a way to really critique and examine the economy. I currently live in North Andover, Massachusetts. I moved there to work at a secondary boarding school as ethics teacher and campus minister, and I'm now an interim UCC minister doing adjunct work. But what's interesting is I live in North Andover, Massachusetts, which 2 months ago was one of 3 towns that had all the gas explosions. And I've been doing a lot of community education in that area. I've been asked to do it around anti-racism and sort of critical states of whiteness stuff. And this gas explosion, and it's predominantly Andover, North Andover, which is predominantly white and super privileged, and went half and half in the presidential election, which so for Massachusetts, we're sort of. But through the gas, so we're neighbored by Lawrence, which is one of the poorest areas in Massachusetts, and it's mostly Latinx population, a lot of immigration. And so watching how Columbia Gas and the state and everyone else is treating residents of different economic positions different. I mean, it's 2 months later and there's still like 6,000 homes that don't have gas or heat right now in that area. So in doing the education, the public education, trying to make it intersectional enough for folks to see how the economics play into what's going on in the communities and advocating and partnering in ways that are.
Thank you. Go right ahead.
I'm Laura Stivers. I work at Dominican University of California, also dealing with the smoke for right north of the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm also an ethicist and many economic issues, but I'll pick
just one
inequality and the corporate and elite control of so much of everything that's going on, and how it's really causing so many people not to be able to just have basic stability and let alone flourish.
I'm Toddy Peters. I'm also a Christian ethicist. I teach at Elon University in North Carolina, and I also direct our poverty and social justice program there. So just one, I struggle daily with trying to figure out this gap between where we are and where we need to be, and how we as ethicists and people of faith and people working on these issues can help people walk through those steps to get there. So that gap between capitalism, which we know is corrupt and killing us, to where we need to be, and how to figure out the pathway through to the next stage.
I'm Cynthia Molovita, and I teach Christian ethics again at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary and the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. And I guess many, but one for me is this compelling reality that corporate and finance-driven globalization sets up our lives such that everything we do is based upon exploited labor and stolen goods, and now is generating climate change that other people are suffering from. And so getting through that is a compelling passion of my life. Dealing with that in ways that do not create shame and powerlessness is what is a compelling passion of my life.
I'm going to skip a little bit over here to the people who've come in later so that we can introduce ourselves by our name and where we're located and one economic issue. So welcome.
Okay. Well, I'm Nina Henrich-Teresiankova.
Could you speak aloud so we can all hear you?
I'm Nina Henrich-Teresiankova, and I'm here from Portland, Oregon, University of Portland. Economic issues. I have a hard time naming since I'm coming late. I didn't have a chance to prepare myself.
That's okay. You don't have to. We can move along if you don't want to. That's fine. We're glad you're here. And she already went. But these two folks over here.
Oh, I'm Celia Wexler, and I'm a journalist, and I'm here to actually listen to all of you because I want to understand why people who teach and study and are scholars in religion are so driven to change the world and make it better.
I think you've come to the right place. Great writing as Catholic.
Yeah. Carol Dempsey from the University of Portland. My area is biblical studies, primarily prophets and gender and all kinds of things like that. I guess the economic issue for me is climate change with its many faces and all of the connections that are with it.
Good to have you.
Thank you. And I'm teaching a course, the second time around, team teaching a course at our university in that, and it's always book solid, so that's good.
That's great. Did we miss anybody? You'll notice we don't apologize for taking this much time for introductions, because I think we've heard not only from a range of countries and a range of positions, but we've heard a range of issues that we know about, but as we begin to systematize some of our thinking about it, it's so useful to have this amazing resource. And you've also heard from people, some of whom you know and some of whom you want to get to know, and that's another reason to be here. So I turn to Lucia Fiorenza with one last caveat that Heather Eaton from Ottawa was supposed to be with us, was listed as a speaker, but is unable for personal reasons to join us. So I bring her greetings. Elizabeth, please.
Okay, I am Elizabeth Fiorenza, and I teach at Harvard Divinity School. And today I'm concerned with academic matters. I was trying to get a book from Amazon which is a collection of essays on Latin's experiences and theology. And I found out that it was $136.
Oh my God.
And you couldn't get it to a cheaper price, but to a higher price. So women and minorities, other minorities, have just retained access to the academy, and now and to publishing, and now we are publishing for the people who want to make money, and nobody can read our hard work. Well, at least nobody who is not a millionaire or something like this. Okay, I'm very honored to introduce our two speakers today. Susan, as we already heard, Dr. Susan Putzweg is professor of theology at Chicago Theological Seminary. From June of 1998 until June of 2008, she served as the 11th president of CTS. Prior to the presidency, she had been professor of theology at CTS for 20 years and director of the PhD Center for 5 years. She has a PhD from Duke University, a Master's of Divinity cum laude from Duke Divinity School, and a BA from Smith College. She is an ordained minister of the United Church of Christ since 1974. She also is the author of or editor of 13 academic books, including 2 different translations of the Bible. She is also now the author of 2 mystery novels and is at work on a third. And I was chiding her before we started that she didn't give me the titles of the 2 mystery novels, because that's what I wanted to read.
All right, the first one is called Where Drowned Things Live. It's about sexual harassment on a campus that shall remain nameless. And the second one is called Every Wickedness, which is about prostitution, endorsed by Dr. Rita Nakashima-Brock. And the third one, which is about the infiltration of white supremacists onto a college campus, which I'm 3/4 of the way through writing, is called Where Demons Float. So I promised Elizabeth I would send the first 2, which are published, and they're only $9 to her for her reading pleasure.
Okay, Dr. Putzweg is also has also most recent academic book by Parker Macmillan, which is called Women's Bodies as Battlefield, Christian Theologies and the Global War on Women, and how much is that?
$20.
Well, that's good. Okay. Her title is Women and Children Last Abuse as a Global and Local Economic Model.
All right. So I'm talking for you now, or are you going to introduce my colleague? So you want me to talk first?
You
go after you talk. Why don't you go ahead, Doc, and then we'll... All right, yeah, okay. All right, need a prop for this. All right. So, the title, Women and Children Last, Abuse as a Global Economic Model. I was thinking about it after I sent the title to Mary, and when I reach in my purse and I find loose change, I'm always very happy. Because when I was a kid, my father would, from time to time, not give my mother money to buy food. And it was abuse. And so she and I would go hunting for change in the backs of drawers, the couch. And whenever I feel change, to this day, I feel happy. And to have the wherewithal to buy food, and I don't like to drop money for the person who picks it up off the sidewalk, is power. And it stopped when I was 7. I was hungry, and I was walking home from school, and I saw this church at a food pantry, a peasant church, and I went in, and I just told the pastor who was there that I was hungry, and he gave me several cans of SpaghettiOs. And I brought them home, and they say, I'll have someone think, what would your favorite meal? Lobster and SpaghettiOs. And because it tasted great. And that night, the pastor paid a call. And he embarrassed my father by offering help because we didn't have food. So he never did it again. Did other things, we didn't do that. And, you know, at the most concrete level, the capacity to follow the money, what's happening with the money. I remember Gustavo Gutierrez on a panel. I was on with him at the American Academy of Religion. Gustavo said Jesus sat down opposite the treasury where he could see the money box. Now everybody knows that as the widow's mite, right? That's what the widow did with her money. Gustavo said, Jesus said, follow the money. And that is axiomatic in liberation theology. You want to know where the power is? You follow the money. And global capitalism, I do not need to rehearse this, it's also 8 to 10 minute address, is predatory. The way that we need to understand global capitalism from a liberation analysis is not merely that it exploits crises, but that global capitalism is involved in creating the crises, whether it is war or now global climate collapse. The exploitation of these is a source, we would look at this as crisis, they look at it, of course, as opportunity. And one of the classes I teach on this, we use Naomi Klein, disaster capitalism and so forth. And Klein says, when she did the research for that, every wrenching statistic of global capitalism feeding on people had the story of women and children at its source. Yet, I don't believe, as much as I find Klein's work useful, that her work is more descriptive and less analytical in relationship to, the statistics show that women and children are suffering, but you want to turn that around in liberation analysis in climate catastrophe and begin to look at what is happening in these people's lives, and it was said over here, is also a resource for making change. But the relationship, and I think it is important to focus on climate catastrophe and predatory capitalism because this is the way patriarchy functions, all right? This is the way patriarchy functions. It feeds upon the energies of others. And it is a capacity, it has the capacity to mutate, like a virus. So if it's regulated here, it mutates over here, and you've suddenly got green billionaires. What the blazes is a green billionaire, right? And so you've got a mutating function. Now, we need in this location to think about the future of feminist liberation analysis. And the feminist liberation analysis future is increasingly complicated. This is the good news. This is the good news. Because it is race, it is sexual orientation, it is labor, it is activism, it is the contradictions among these things. Contradiction is a problem for predatory capitalism. It's not a problem in feminist liberation analysis. So I am positing the patterns of the abuse of women are essential to understand predatory global capitalism. It's wrecking the future of the planet, even as we speak. My son, daughter-in-law, and my 2.5-year-old grandchild live in Berkeley. There is a smoke day, so they closed the daycare. Now, a little brag, my son stayed home with the baby so his wife could go to her job, and he, it's kind of cheating because he can telecommute. He asked me, wouldn't you like to do a video conference and read some books to Lydia? And I said, well, I'd love to, son, but I'm going to get this paper on patriarchy. But anyway, but this smoke days, we got a smoke day. The UN figures that 80% of the people displaced by climate change are women. Caregivers, people who provide the fuel, people who provide the food are primarily women. So in terms of flooding, in terms of fire, in terms of drought, it is primarily women and the children dependent on them who are the victims. All right, so what happens in the 2015 Paris Agreement? Specific provision for the empowerment of women, and this is a quotation, recognizing that they are disproportionately impacted by the effects of catastrophic global climate change. So naturally, so the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, if implemented, might have been able to slow down this juggernaut. Might have been able to slow it down. So the United States elects a fascist, a white supremacist, a climate change denier, an admitted sex offender, and an accused domestic abuser. And this even modest momentum is being replaced by the rise of fascism, not just in the United States, but globally. Fascism is on the rise. Now, call me a person who practices a hermeneutic of suspicion. Let's just put those two things, or a number of things together. Global capitalism, fascism, and climate change. That the very cooperation that is needed to bring about even this modest interruption of these trajectories. But that is not the only story. That is not the only story, because what fascism wants, what fascism depends upon, is for people losing faith in circles, in communities, in the capacity of people for democratic action. I went door to door. I co-chair the Moms Against Gun Violence and the Every Town for Gun Safety here in Colorado, in the mountains, door to door in this last campaign. And so I want to close with Lucy McBath. Lucy McBath's son, Jordan Davis, a black teen, was shot and killed at a Jacksonville, Florida gas station by a white man who complained that he and his friends were playing music too loudly in their car. The shooter has been sentenced to life without parole, and Lucy McBath has been working with us in Moms Demand Gun Sense. And then she ran for Congress. And she will represent Georgia in the 6th Congressional District. Yeah. So I'm old enough to remember when we didn't even have the term domestic violence. We actually had wife beating. We had to invent the term in order to even make it visible that women being beaten was wrong. So liberation theology, feminist liberation theology, is contextual. The money in my purse. That's context. It's praxis. It brings one more crucial element to this struggle. If fascists want us to despair of community, of action, of democratic institutions, feminist liberation theologians do not quit. That's it. Thank you very much.
Dr. Cynthia Moore is professor of theological and social ethics at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary and Church Divinity School of the Pacific in Berkeley, California. She has given lectures around the world, including in Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, Australia, and North America. Her current areas of research include climate justice and climate racism, moral agency, globalization, economic justice, ecofeminist theology, and faith-based resistance to systemic oppression. Her book, Resisting Structural Evil, Love as Ecological Economic Vocation, won a Nautilus Award for Social Justice. She is author or co-author of 6 volumes and numerous articles and chapters. Professor Moore Loboda is also on the core doctoral faculty of the Graduate Theological Union. Her title today is Advanced Global Capitalism, Climate Change, and an Equitable Ecological Future.
Thank you. I am sitting here feeling so respectful of and grateful to the people in this room and your work, because it is so important. And this is before my 10 minutes. I also want to say that I think in the midst of the current climate, it is extraordinarily easy to feel that our work doesn't matter and can't make a difference. I have felt that way. I can't make a difference. It's just, and I am here to say, in part, our work matters. The work of every person in this room matters deeply in the current climate. And I loved your ending, that feminist liberation theologians don't give up. So that's very, very real.
Otherwise it would be called liberation.
Yeah. And I also really want to just thank Water for its ongoing feeding of subversive moral agency in this world. 2 other things I really want to say, that I'm overjoyed because my son is here and he lives in Denver, and when I said I was coming, he asked if I was giving a talk, and I said this, he said he wanted to come. I said, it's only 10 minutes, it's feminist liberation. He said, I wanted to come. So welcome to my son and also to his family. It's a joy.
We would have to talk.
And I promised I wouldn't introduce him to everybody. But the other thing is, a lot of my comments come from my book called Resisting Structural Evil, and you have a flyer for that book. So 10 minutes, woo! I would like us to take very seriously and with fervent hope the burgeoning movement to build a new economy, a post-capitalist economy. And by new economy, I mean economies, local, national, and international, that are characterized by that are more equitable, more ecological, and democratic. And by democratic, I mean here in shorthand, accountable and distributed power. So let's take that seriously. From a theological perspective, to me, this movement is a magnificent manifestation of the Holy Spirit resurrecting life from the tortured Golgotha of today, in which so many people are crucified by the imperial power of corporate and finance-driven globalization. So go Holy Spirit working in us and through us. I'd like to note 4 presuppositions of my comments, and then make 4 points, and then spend the rest of my time positing a feminist theoethical framework for conceptualizing this movement into a new economy. So that's where we're going. Presuppositions. First, and this we all know, that's why I'm calling it a presupposition. Advanced global capitalism is set up to maximize short-term profit and concentrate wealth in the hands of a very few who are not accountable to the people who suffer from those processes. And second, that the consequences of maximizing short-term maximizing short-term profit by unaccountable profiteers is deadly and destructive on 3 fronts. One of those is Earth's fragile ecosystems. Another is the countless human beings and communities, historically and contemporarily, who are, not incidentally, disproportionately people of color who are exploited. And the third is it's deadly to democratic processes and trajectories because concentrated wealth translates to concentrated power. So my third presupposition is that arguably the most powerful constellation of human forces that the world has ever known is lined up to maintain that concentration of wealth and power. And they include the fossil fuel industry, much of the speculative finance industry, and significant parts of the political and religious right in the US. But my fourth presupposition, perhaps the most important, is, excuse me, don't say that, that's not the most important. My fourth presupposition is that a pervasive response on a societal level has been to privatize morality and step back in powerlessness from confronting systemic injustice. It seems too big, so we'll be as good as we can in private life. Grounded in those four disheartening presuppositions, I'd like to make 4 points that are aimed at building moral agency for public morality in the form of transition to a new economy, equitable, ecological, and democratic. So, and normally, my friends, I don't do this. I don't rattle off points, but we're faced with 10 minutes, and I really respect time limits, so that's what I'm doing here. But I do really want to make 4 points, and one is that advanced global capitalism is not inevitable. Anything set up by human decisions and actions can be undone by human decisions and actions. To me, that's vitally important to me. Secondly, advanced global capitalism, as we know it, literally will not continue into the future. And that is not, at this point, a political or a moral statement. It's a physical statement. That distinction is really crucial. Earth, as a biosystem, cannot continue to do it because advanced global capitalism, as we know it, depends upon and presupposes at least 4 things that Earth literally can't do. And one is growth, economic growth at almost any cost. Earth has limits to that. Secondly, it requires freedom to maximize profit, understood as a human right, including through brutally exploitative measures, and including extraction. And again, Earth can't continue to do that. Third, advanced global capitalism as we know it requires a societal consumption orgy fueled by a brilliant advertising industry that convinces people to fill their lives with junk. Earth can't continue to create the resources for all that junk. So these things, so what I'm saying is the economy as we know it won't go on. Together, these requirements that I just named require maximizing the extraction and use of fossil fuels. And if we extracted all of the fossil fuels that are now owned and slated for extraction by the industry, it would mean we're toast. So in other words, Earth ain't gonna do it. But the third point that I want to make is that while we have no choice whether economic life will go on as we know it, we have amazing power to determine in which directions the change will go. Towards benefiting a few or towards ecological, equitable, unparalleled partly because the areas of devastation are so linked. We now are getting it, that white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism are linked. So the movements to address any of those are also addressing all of them. That is profoundly hopeful. The other reason, and I could spend hours on this, but the other reason that I believe we live in a moment of unparalleled potential and hope is just because of the grit and determination and widespreadness of the movement towards new economies. I remember being at the UN with the World Council of Churches in some years ago at a big event, and there was like 1,000 groups with little tents out there, all completely dedicated to more just and more ecological economies. We don't see the movement in this country because of all that goes on, but it is so profound. So, for my remaining minutes, I would just like to suggest some features of a feminist, liberationist, theoethical framework for building the new economy. And we all know that feminism has many forms, and I don't have time to situate myself within feminism. But I am convinced that there are some really key dimensions that feminist liberationist theory and theology and practice bring to the new economy, to this movement, that it depends upon us to name and build in. And one is the insistence that a gender equity lens and a racial equity lens join the economic equity lens in the building of the new economy. So there are a lot of people that are convinced that we've got to look at economic equity and are not seeing it through a gender lens and a racial equity lens. And that's problematic. That's really problematic. So there we need to bring those two lenses. Secondly, we need to bring a radically reoriented moral anthropology. And we can all talk about the deficits of basically we human beings are not who we thought we were. Like, we all know we're not the autonomous moral agent. Well, we need to work that in many ways. And again, that could be another few hours here. Third, we need to bring a reconstituted theology of neighbor love that deprivatizes neighbor love as though it were something that pertained to private life and not public life. Thank you, Reinhold Niebuhr. But also that holds neighbor love to be inclusive of self-love and extending beyond the human being. So therein is a task of theology. Fourth, we need to emphasize a moral epistemology that, and this is familiar to all of us, that really centers voices on the margins of power and privilege, including other than human voices. Fourth, and again, we need to bring the re-understanding, the remembering of U.S. history, to emphasize that the material wealth of this country and the material wealth of the financial powers that now run the world is built on the enslavement of African peoples, the genocide and stealing of the lands of the peoples of the Americas, the extraction of Earth's mineral wealth, and the ongoing fossil fuel orgies. So that lens on history needs to be brought to the movement, the new economy movement. And I'm almost done with this list. We need to bring a theory and theology of power that really affirms and builds women's power and collective power. And I'm very aware of that as I still teach students who say that power is something we're not supposed to have. We were supposed to give up power. So we need to undo that misspoken understanding of power. We need, these are my last two, a reoriented vision of economy, of what the economy is for. Not for maximizing the production and consumption of goods and services, but for maximizing economic ecological sustainability and economic democracy, a completely different understanding of the purpose of economic life. And finally, and to me this is really important, we need to bring a theory of social transformation that weds resistance and rebuilding rather than saying that one of those is better than the other, that links change on the levels of worldview and household and corporate and public policy, and that really holds together the complementarity of different forms of action. And I am sick of conversations in which different forms of action are held up to be the way to go. And so here we've named different forms of action. Providing food and housing is vitally important. And doing the theorizing is vitally important. Doing the civil disobedience. So holding, I could list, I've got, in my book, I list like 10 forms of action, and they're to be held together and they're not to be dissociated or put in competition. So I would like to close. And one of those forms of action is theological reflection and biblical reflection. I won't even go into that story. I'll close by saying we've named 4 presuppositions and 4 points and some pieces of a theoethical framework for the new economy. I would then say this: we, the dangerous species called human, hover on a precipice. What human beings do in the next very few years will determine which parts of humankind survive the climate catastrophe, and we could do it in ways that the descendants of Europe with money survive and the descendants of Africa and Asia don't, and will determine whether life on this planet goes on in ways recognizably human. For decades, feminist, liberationist, theoethical work, and we can think here about water and many of the other movements in this room, have wielded the power of sisterhood and moral courage to resist the horrors of systemic evil and to build ways of life grounded in justice and joy. May we continue to bring the gifts of that proud legacy to this testing point in human history now.
I want to thank both Susan and Cynthia for informative as well as inspiring presentations, and I'm sure you join me in that gratitude. I want to mention one more time that tomorrow morning from 9 to 11:30, the Women's Caucus will have a similar session with 3 more papers, bringing 3 more perspectives on these economic issues, and I invite you to join us there where we'll continue our discussion. Now, what we do is the most fun part of our time together, which is that we take a question or two and we form small groups right where we're sitting and just pull your chairs around and talk with people. And I'd like to suggest that we look very concretely at ways that what Susan and Cynthia have brought us by way of theoretical and theological reflection help us to understand what our studies, what our training, what our work in feminist liberation theology does to lessen economic inequality. What are the concrete ways in which we can do that? What are strategies for teaching, for preaching, for the practice of economic literacy that are informed by feminist liberation work? It's the both feminist liberation theological work. In other words, look at it from both angles. What we can bring from feminist liberation theology to the economic conversation and what the economic conversation brings to us. But try to be as concrete as you can be in terms of the change in your purse or the fire in your neighborhood or the classroom in which you find yourself to help us to move forward on this agenda. I think there are many varied resources in this room, one of which is the variety of people, the people from a variety of countries. And this also helps us to bring perspective. So it is now 5:23, and at 5:40 I will call the question. So we have a roughly 20-minute period. We're going to have to work fast. Groups of 4 to 5 max, and then we will bring ourselves into a plenary discussion about next steps. Thank you very much again to our speakers, and please